Philomela, Voice to the Voiceless. Chapter 2, The High Priestess. On Thanksgiving Day of 2019, I traveled to Asheville, North Carolina to take the graduate record exam the next morning, Black Friday. I was applying for a PhD in classics. I'd taken the GRE to get into my master's program, but my scores were more than 5 years old, so I had to do it again. Asheville was the nearest location I could get to before the deadline. I'd registered online and reserved a hotel room there. It wasn't a very long drive, a couple hours away. My plan was to check in, then go to a nearby Cracker Barrel to have their traditional turkey dinner. Once I was in a tryptophan daze, I'd return to my room, spread out in the big bed, and study my vocabulary flashcards while watching cable TV, possibly take a bubble bath. I wanted to go to sleep at a decent hour because the test was bright and early. I'd need to be up at the crack of dawn. I pulled a tarot card before leaving for Asheville. The High Priestess. At the time, it seemed like the perfect card. A priestess would be highly educated, well-versed in obscure knowledge. I took the priestess as being my goal. I wanted to be initiated into all the mysteries of the classics, to become an expert in my field. I'd been reading a book about druids, and I thought of everything their priestesses would know, how long they had to study, how much they would have memorized. I took the priestess as a symbol of learning, of having mastered a craft. My boyfriend Hades started messaging me as I was sitting in the restaurant. I wanted to focus on my delicious meal, but it was nice to hear from him. It felt like he was keeping me company, almost like we were spending the holiday together. Hades lived in another state, 1,300 miles from my home. Our relationship was long distance, but I was supposed to move there the next summer. He was finished with family time for the day, and he wanted to talk. Specifically, he wanted to talk about what he wanted to do to me. He was in an amorous mood. I felt a blush rise to my cheeks as I read his texts in public, hoping no one around me could see the words on the screen. His messages seemed way too risque for Cracker Barrel. I was aware of my body responding to our conversation. He was being both explicit and poetic. My friend Penthesilea liked to tease me about how bad Hades and I were at sexting, how it was all, "You're my goddess of the river," and flowery. He did often call me his river goddess, in the context of wanting to taste my waters. Perhaps my favorite thing is receiving oral sex, and Hades loved doing this, so we were well matched in that regard. That night, he was describing in detail how he wanted me to really let loose and ride his face. Back in my room, I did not watch TV or study much at all. I exchanged dirty texts, photographs, and voice clips with Hades for hours. I was so horny that I was practically writhing in the big bed. I had on a white robe with pink roses that I felt conflicted about. It said bride on the back. I'd bought it for my second honeymoon. The robe was soft and pretty and had been a splurge, so it seemed a waste to throw it away or donate it when I'd hardly gotten to wear the thing. My marriage to Bacchus had been brief. We got married on May the 4th, as in May the 4th be with you, because we were Star Wars nerds. I left him at the beginning of June, before we'd even been married a month, because he was becoming progressively more violent. We'd lived together for a year and a half, but in terms of actual married time, it was over in a flash. Shortly after I parted ways with Bacchus, I met Hades. I took sexy selfies in the robe, figuring Hades couldn't see the back of it in pictures and wouldn't know how tacky I was being. I opened up the front to show my breasts and all the rest. He reacted positively. He was particularly ardent that night. He'd never sent so many or such graphic messages. I was in the part of my moon cycle where I usually feel most feisty, and we kept each other spinning, high on words. I went down to my car to smoke a bowl, and it occurred to me that I really was a high priestess, or maybe just high. If priests can give a sacrament in the form of hoc est corpus meum hocus pocus, then as a pagan priestess, my sacrament is at least real, something that grows from the ground as what it actually is. Pot does not need magic words spoken over it to transubstantiate it. Magic is what it already contains. I was messaging with Hades as I smoked. Being very health conscious, he didn't smoke cigarettes and rarely pot. He'd only smoked pot with me once, but a few other times we'd taken vegan edibles together. I thought he was cute when he was high. It slowed him down, made him sillier. He was more likely to stumble over his words and giggle. I knew that he was not as much of a stoner as I was, did not seek it out regularly on his own like I did. He dabbled, while I was a daily dabber. Yet we got on the same wavelength when we worshipped together. To me, cannabis is spiritual in nature. It takes from me my stress, fear, and nightmares, and gives to me a certain peace of mind that can be hard to find. Hades was straight that night, no Mary Jane bebopping in his brain, but we could still connect. We were supposed to see each other again in less than a month, but that felt like forever. He told me he was having a rough time with the distance, wanted me closer, needed to be able to see and touch and kiss me. In Asheville, I was even farther away from him. I longed for his physical presence, but I marveled at how it felt like he was with me, even with all the miles in between us. Our bond felt so big that it seemed to go beyond time and space. He wished me luck on my test and said that I was brilliant and he knew I would do well. As he told me how much he loved me, and to have sweet dreams, and to look for him on the astral plane, I believed that he was a good man, my man, a trustworthy man. Later, I would realize that I was oh so wrong about Hades, that he was a liar and a fraud. I didn't know this at the time, but Hades had not been honest with me about when his marriage ended. He'd told me when we met in the summer of 2019 that he'd been divorced for 2 years. In reality, that Thanksgiving would have been his first major holiday after the divorce had just become official. Was he so passionate that night because he was seeking escape, diving headfirst into lust to avoid feeling the pain of that dissolution? He had spent Thanksgiving with his ex-wife and their kids. When all was said and done, once he was by himself, could he not bear it? I let a man use me to postpone facing his situation, instead of directing that energy into my own mind and potentially scoring higher on the GRE. As the clock marched toward midnight on Thanksgiving, I knew that Hades would go to sleep by 10, his preferred bedtime. It was 2 hours earlier where he was. I'd also hoped to be asleep by 10 my time, but it was much later when I finally found slumber. I flipped through my flashcards for a bit after Hades and I stopped messaging, feeling guilty for neglecting them. It was nearing the witching hour when I turned in. I woke before the sun rose and took my test. It was long, about 4 hours. The math sections were daunting and felt impossible. They drained me for the verbal sections, which were my strength, and which counted more for my program. I had a hard time focusing on the reading passages because I felt so mentally depleted from the triangles and graphs, and I wanted to kick myself for not going to bed earlier. I had a dim awareness that I'd somewhat sabotaged myself by staying up with Hades. I felt that I should have studied and slept more. When I first took the GRE in 2011, I scored in the 97th percentile on verbal. This time, my score went down 3 points. I was disappointed. I'd hoped it would go up with age and experience in the classroom, with having read more books. Had my memory gotten worse? Had it been too long since I had been a student myself and taken an exam? Or had I been distracted? I'd been using a box of vocabulary flashcards custom tailored to the GRE, and several of the words I'd just looked over late the night before appeared on the test. What if I'd studied them more thoroughly, absorbed the last ones I kept forgetting? Might those have been the key to success? I felt down on myself. To cheer myself up, I went and wandered around downtown Asheville, passed the rest of Black Friday browsing in some cute hippie stores. I'd only been to Asheville a couple times, but I loved all the New Age shops. In one of them, I saw an adorable miniature deck of Rider-Waite tarot cards, the style I've primarily worked with. They're perhaps the most famous, the classic in my mind, my favorite design. I owned a regular-sized set. All the Rider-Waite boxes I'd ever seen had a picture of the magician on the front. This tiny box had the High Priestess on the front. She caught my eye. It was interesting to me that the card had happened to show up randomly in the world around me. I stared at the little deck for some time, wanting to buy it, but feeling like it would be decadent, self-indulgent. I already had the big Rider-Waite deck and 2 other decks of tarot cards. I didn't need it, but I wanted it. I held it for a while, loving how it fit in the palm of my hand, and almost took it to the register, then put it down. Instead of getting myself the cards, I bought a present for Hades. It cost as much as the cards would have. I got him a silver wall hanging with shiny embroidered fabric pieces that had symbols for the 7 chakras. It looked like a rainbow pillar with dangling squares of color. I justified this because it was for someone else, not selfish. How many times and ways did I choose the man in my life over myself? I could have invested in myself, made that room in the Holiday Inn my scholarly sanctuary, instead of a place for a virtual romantic rendezvous. He didn't make me pick him. I just naturally did. My instinct is to seek validation and approval. Attentions of a sexual nature have an especially strong hold on me. For some reason, the thought that a man wants to put his junk in me has enormous sway over me. Acting to please a man is reflexive. Sniffly. To be a priestess, to be learned and actualized as an individual, much solitude is required. You must be able to be alone with yourself, to befriend and train your mind. A scholar has to stay in front of their books for hours. If I had it to do over, I would have practiced for the exam more diligently. 94th percentile isn't bad, still an A, thought my teacher brain. But teacher brain also reminded me that it was a low A. I knew I could have done better. I would have gotten myself the tarot cards as a reward for a solid effort, though. In retrospect, both the time I spent getting Hades off and the money I spent getting him a gift were wasted. Those 3 points on the GRE probably didn't keep me from getting into the PhD program. I don't know why I wasn't accepted. But I suspect it was not the right path for me, at least not then. I'm not sure that I want to be a professor anymore. I was in denial that my real dream was to be a writer. Maybe I believed that being a professor would give me permission to write. I am letting myself do that now, have given myself permission to write whatever I feel like. And while there can be bliss from merging with another person, I lose myself too easily. All Hades had to do was tell me that he wanted me, and I was his, body, mind, and spirit. How many years did I squander, abandoning myself in the name of true love, when frequently there was neither truth nor love to be had? I shudder to think. But we grow too soon old and too late wise. I could have had a PhD or two already had I been more disciplined. This is not to say that one must be celibate or shouldn't be generous in love. Priests in the Catholic Church and other priests and priestesses throughout history have had to take vows of chastity. The Vestal virgins were buried alive if they had sex. I disagree with such restrictions on principle, believing that they cause more harm than benefit. It is damaging to place unreasonable standards of perfect purity on people and instill shame in them for having normal human desires. But there is something to be said for the space celibacy would create for other pursuits. There are only so many hours in the day. Removing the complication of entanglements does leave one able to accomplish more. If you want to do something, anything, well, you must work at it. Whether you want to play the violin or be an architect, you must devote yourself to improving. Men are generally encouraged to focus on their careers, to be doers. Women are part of the workforce now, too, but it seems they are expected to have a full-time job and do everything else as well. Cook, clean, care for others. Women need more free time that does not involve sex or domestic tasks. The Druids did not commit many of their teachings to writing, wanting to pass them down orally, to keep memory sharp, and prevent their secrets from falling into the wrong hands. I think sometimes, of all the lines of poetry they would be able to recite by heart. What an achievement that would be, to possess worlds within yourself, wisdom and insights no one could take from you. In the Catholic Church, there are no priestesses, just priests. A woman can be a nun, but there is no position of power for her. She can't be the one up on the stage who turns bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. She is to be humble, to serve endlessly, and to have little say in anything of substance. It is this exclusion of women from any rank of authority that makes me have a beef with Catholicism. Well, that's one of the reasons. The pedophilia is what really gets my goat. When I think of a priest, I first think of a fairly narrow definition. The dude in fancy robes, up there doing his magic trick during Mass. And I feel contempt. When, however, I think of a priestess, my mind goes to older, more earth-based religions, where the feminine aspect of the divine was honored. I think of the Eleusinian mysteries, Isis cults, Sibyls, and Morgan Le Fay. I have a positive bias for the word priestess over priest. Granted, either a priest or priestess could abuse their power and promote nonsense. There was probably a healthy dose of bullshit in the pagan religions I idealized too, an emphasis on sacrifices, omens interpreted so that they would further one's personal interests, and corruption. But the Druids and Druidesses were highly educated. They studied for 20 years sometimes. They learned about the gods and goddesses, yes, and I'm sure their share of superstition, but also about the natural world, astronomy, medicine, etc. They were the intellectual elite, privy to a wealth of esoteric knowledge. Esoteric and occult were the first words I thought of with the High Priestess card. But they basically mean the same thing. Occult has a connotation of magical, supernatural, but comes from a word simply meaning hidden, not known to most people. and esoteric from more within, in the sense of belonging to an inner circle, again, not known to most people. As I studied the High Priestess card off and on, it occurred to me that it was fitting for pursuing a PhD in classics. Latin and Greek appealed to me because there are few who truly understand them, and I wanted to be one of those people. I didn't want to have to cop out and say, "I don't know, let's look it up," when a student asked a question about something obscure. I wanted to already know. There's so much to the classical world, and it's unlikely that I'll ever know it all. There's no shame in a Google search. I am not a human encyclopedia, and that is not my aspiration. But I wanted the hidden insights. I wanted to be brought into the inner circle. It gave me a strange confidence to go into the test thinking of myself as someone studying to be a high priestess of Latin and Greek. PhD, Doctor of Philosophy. When I was about 10 years old, I decided that I wanted to be a philosopher when I grew up. I didn't yet know that it meant a lover of wisdom, but I have always been one. I have had students who are extrinsically motivated by grades or rewards, but I have also had those intrinsically motivated ones who are just curious, who want to know. Curious, not from the Latin word cur, meaning why, as I thought for so long, but from cura, care. I tried to read Bertrand Russell's A History of Western Philosophy when I was too young to comprehend even half of it, because I cared enough to check it out from the library. I thought of all the things a priestess would know, and all the things I wanted to know, the academic in me. In the context of applying to graduate school, the card gave me some encouragement. I decided that whatever the arcane practices might have been, I would be my own kind of priestess, and my rituals would have none of the brutality of the ancient world. There would be no one to propitiate. I have done some pondering on the imagery of the High Priestess card. On either side of her are two pillars of equal size, one black, one white, with the letter B on the black pillar and J on the white one. I didn't know what the letters meant at first, but after blowjob, the first words I thought of were balance and justice. I looked it up, and they stand for Boaz and Jachin, which were at the entrance to the mystic temple of Solomon. Solomon, known for his wisdom. Is there wisdom in between the BJs? There is a crescent moon lying tangled up in the priestess's robe at her feet, and she's wearing a crown that looks like the phases of the moon. There is a cross on her chest, and she appears to be holding the Torah, details I don't love, since I am predisposed to have an aversion to Abrahamic religions. But in the background are some superyonic-looking fruits. With the moons and the vaginas, she brings to mind the intuition of the feminine. There is also a good deal of blue in the picture, making me think of water, which can represent emotions, but also the sky, metaphorically air, thought. It seems as if she understands the realm of feelings and has the realm of mind down too. Hers is a wisdom that uses logic, but is also beyond logic. I look at the High Priestess as a seeker of knowledge in both instances, head knowledge and heart knowledge. More about magic, especially pertaining to sacraments. There is magic in Christianity, but only as ordained. The Catholics have their priests turn bread to flesh and wine to blood. But what of other alternative sacraments? For me, cannabis and magic mushrooms are a form of communion. They come from the earth, something greater than me, and when taken into my body, They alter my consciousness in such a way that I learn valuable lessons. From pot, I have learned to slow down, relax, find the humor, connect with others, laugh, appreciate art in all its forms, create art in as many forms as I can, love deeply and fully, come into my body, be here now, enjoy how it feels to be alive, choose adventure, and be the brave heroine of my own life. From shrooms, I have learned that reality is a subjective experience, that there is no division between me and the rest of all that is, that I am made of the same stuff as stars and salamanders, that the light of the sun and the moon are both made of pure love, which is the same energy that runs through everything if we are open to seeing it, that the world is even more dynamic than it looks, and always moving on micro and macrocosmic levels, and so much more. I can only imagine how AA people might make fun of me for this, but I do see these as sacraments, as spiritual and medicinal in nature. I may have leaned more heavily on the self-medicating side at times, but with mushrooms in particular, I look at a trip as a vision quest, as part of my spiritual journey. AA would say I am just rationalizing my drug use. But even Bill W. used hallucinogens to try to enhance his spiritual growth, and some AA lore claims that his white light moment of finding God came from LSD. Acid can teach valuable lessons too. My primary interest is in natural hallucinogens, though. It is amazing to wonder, is this what happens when the deeper wisdom of this life form is filtered through my limited senses and perceptions? Wisdom, lover of wisdom. Sometimes I wonder if pot affects my judgment, makes me inclined to put stock in poppycock. Perhaps it does make one more susceptible to alluring fantasies. But a sober person can also be hoodwinked, swindled. I do not blame cannabis for Hades's deception. I blame Hades. When I was in recovery, when I had at one point not done any drug or taken a sip of alcohol for 6 consecutive years, I still fell prey to vile men who misrepresented themselves. Some of the worst things that ever happened to me with men took place when both I and they were not intoxicated. I suspect that my being duped repeatedly had to do with my tendency to want to see the best in people and my habit of ignoring waving red flags. I have not wanted to be a harsh, condemning priestess. There have been bursts of intuition, knowings beyond knowing, that I might be in danger. But it seemed judgmental to assume the worst of people. I have been wounded by men who have presented as sincere, and that can happen to anyone. But I have learned to listen more carefully and respectfully to that little voice inside. To stay safe, a priestess must perhaps become more vigilant, more pitiless and hard-hearted in her self-protective instincts. If there is a flare of wait, no, that doesn't feel right. It should be heeded. When the man's words don't match his actions, when you feel on a gut level that he is lying or taking advantage of you for his own selfish aims, listen. No one is perfect. Everyone makes mistakes. People can and do learn, change, and grow. It is my awareness of this that has convinced me to give people far too many chances. Rather than reject someone, I have loved who they could be, their potential. It was being too merciful that trapped me in abusive marriages. If not marriages, then relationships that stole my time. Time is precious. Where you invest it, you invest your life. One problem with being a priestess is that you do feel for everyone else. Your empathy is through the roof. I could understand how these men fell short of their marks, disappointed women who came before me, let down others and themselves. But I didn't want to reduce them to their lowest, to size them up and say definitively that I had weighed them on the scales of justice and found them lacking. What of the better angels of their nature? What if they were to prevail? Yes, Bacchus got too drunk and delirious on pain pills, hit me and called me a cunt in front of his 5-year-old son. But was that all he was? What if he could rise above that base hate, transcend it? Let him go transcend it on his own. Men often want women to solve their problems for them. Maybe they are unwilling to do the necessary self-reflection and solitary work of rooting out and defeating their demons. Wouldn't it be easier to have a strong, compassionate woman in your corner, someone to nurture and buoy you along the way, boost your morale when your confidence starts to falter? Here is the great secret. Men do not think we are weak. They know how powerful we are. Give a woman some goop, she can make a baby. Give a woman the teensiest bit of money, she can make a welcoming home. Give a woman hell, give her heartbreak, and she can heal into a better version of herself. Admitting to myself what happened with my father has brought patterns that used to be unconscious into the light. I was on autopilot for all those years. As a child, I internalized the lesson that to win love, I needed to be sexual. It has been eye-opening to question my assumptions. Sex does not equal love. This game I've been trying to play is rigged. If I give sex, equating it with love, if there is no love there, then I am allowing myself to be exploited. Also, why do I feel that I need another person's love to have worth? For Valentine's Day this year, I was alone. I embraced my own company. I listened to music, sang, and spent some quality time with myself and my pets. Sorry. I did have moments of loneliness, craving someone to snuggle and pillow talk with, but they were not nearly as bad as being with someone and still feeling alone, as has often been the case for me. The great lie is that I need a partner to be whole or content. Love can be grand, but it is not the end-all be-all that the fairy tales would have us think. For me to sacrifice my own identity to offer up my life to another, I no longer consider this the road to happiness. My challenge to myself and to all women is to make room for independent endeavors. Just as I had a plan that Thanksgiving to sit and delve into my studies, make yourself a cozy little spot where you won't be bothered, and let yourself discover what you love to do separate from any man. Then, if love does find you, you will have a more developed self to share. I can't deny that the hopeless romantic in me would still like for love to be waiting at the end of my journey. But I can also see that I must learn to find fulfillment without it, and could probably use some time off from men. On Valentine's Day, I decided to combine two kinds of magic, each of them mighty in their own right. I wanted to know what would happen if I mixed LSD and mushrooms. As a witch, I figured I should develop in my potion skills. I was also going to do it by myself. I'd only tripped alone once before, and I took such a small dose of mushrooms that the veil barely parted. This was to be the first time that I was going to get possibly very out of my mind and not have anyone nearby. But I wanted to know that I could do it, that I could trust and face myself. I was ready to go from being an apprentice in my craft to a master. I took a gel tab of acid and about 4 grams of mushrooms. I had 2 kinds of shrooms, dried ones, and also a big fresh fungi. I'd never eaten a fresh one before and wasn't sure what it would do, so I only took a few nibbles, a little cap, a little stem. Then I put on a giant red velvet hooded parka that came down to my knees and had a fluffy white fleecy lining. I settled in on the couch to be my own Valentine. The High Priestess card was to be my inspiration during this trip. I wanted music. Almost immediately, before I even started to see shit, I found myself feeling compelled to sing. I started with Chains by Patti Loveless, a song I used to be obsessed with as a little girl. I had a red Sony tape deck as a kid, and I would record myself singing Chains over and over. I was about 5 years old, and I thought that I had made copies of the song and could sell those tapes. I didn't quite get that my spastic renditions were not the same as Patti Loveless's studio recording. I pulled up the song on Spotify, and I was 5 years old again, my voice ringing out like a bell. I had no inhibitions, zero self-consciousness. Let myself belt out the words without restraint. As I sang, I had the idea to film myself. I thought it might be entertaining to look back on later, to see what I was like. Just as a subject, like one of those old black and white videos of acid tests. There's one on YouTube of a 1950s homemaker that I find darling. I also wanted to try to get more comfortable with seeing my face on camera. For as long as I can remember, I've had a weird hang-up about my face. I just don't like it very much, especially in videos. I decided to turn on Hole, remembering that Courtney Love has been one of my favorite musicians since I was 12 or 13 years old. She seemed like a suitable guide, as an integral part of my identity, for what I suspected would be an intense evening. I began thinking of rock and roll priestesses, the riot girls, and strong female musicians I've loved since my youth. I was born listening to Joan Baez, for instance. These iconoclast women were able to make themselves channels for creativity to flow through. How many difficult times had my tough, badass songstresses gotten me through? I sang along with Courtney Love for song after song, in a zone with her voice and my own. I also befriended my face. Courtney's last name is Love, and it was a night of love. I had a realization about why I disliked my face so much. I look like my father. Watching myself on the iPad screen, I saw his nose, his eyebrows, his chin, his big brown eyes. My eyes, so much like his, were beautiful, though, and they were entirely mine. I knew that I needed to reclaim my features. I played Brown Eyed Girl by Van Morrison and sang it to myself with gusto. I emphasized the my in "You're my brown-eyed girl." and the effect it had on me was profound. I started to cry. It dawned on me that I had been afraid to love myself, to be my own brown-eyed girl, because I resemble my father physically. But in that moment, I understood that it didn't matter. My father Jupiter might be a child and animal violator, but I am not. What about people who had sperm donors, who didn't know their fathers? Should they be preoccupied with who gave them that part of their DNA? Worried about who they could be fated to become? Or should they go forward and live their lives? I had not expected the self-love that filled me. I was indeed my own person. I also sang along with the Gits. Mia Zapata, the lead singer, was raped, murdered, and left in an alley in 1993. She has been one of my heroines since high school, a bold voice. I listened to the Everly Brothers, the Righteous Brothers, Fleetwood Mac, L7, Emmylou Harris. I was also seeing some spectacular visions, the whole of my home melting and sparkling and holy. But much of the trip followed a trail of my favorite music. I did not feel scared or out of control, as I'd been concerned I might, doing it alone. I felt as if I were hanging out with a beloved friend, except the friend was me. I found that I enjoyed my company. I made myself laugh. I was expressive and endearing. I was smart, quick. I felt very innocent, childlike. I listened closely to the lyrics of the Courtney Love song Mother, which I was hearing for the first time, and had my mind blown by how well the words described the way I felt. Dream me back into my mother. Dream me back and start me over. Let me lead, you can follow, into the body of an unborn child. I did feel reborn, rewound like one of my old cassette tapes, washed clean, as if I were a blank slate of a lovable baby. I didn't need a man to desire me sexually. All I had to do was be present, be amused, be delighted, be sad if sadness visited, feel whatever I was feeling. Another whole song mentioned milk. Your milk's in my mouth, it makes me sick. A lightning bolt of affirmation that my father had done messed up things to me. But then the instant comfort of knowing that it was not my fault and it had not made me bad like him. I have never once had the urge to touch a child or animal in any sort of inappropriate way. His poison did not get into me. He did not make me sick like he was. I became a woman who taught children and wanted to protect and advocate for them. I became the owner of too many pets, rabbits, cats, and dogs, and I have loved them as if they were my children, been sensitive to their fundamental vulnerability and helplessness. I felt my own basic inherent goodness. If a priest is a pontifex, one who makes a bridge between humans and the divine, then we should all be able to build that bridge. Even an atheist can tap into their higher self. A priest has just been granted authority by a governing body. We do not need to be recognized in this way to be priests or priestesses. When we get quiet and still, we can access a connection to ourselves, to the divine, to whatever we want to call it. And we can begin to create whatever we want from that centered state. If other people drain us of our vital life force, we have nothing left for ourselves. It is not selfish to want to know yourself on a deeper level, to want to see what you are capable of on your own.